Hello and welcome to WION World is One. I'm Ghadi Francis coming to you from Beirut, Lebanon, and this is the West Asia Post, our weekly show where we bring you all the latest updates and stories from this region. The last 2 weeks have been particularly volatile for Europe. It has been 2 weeks since the Ukrainian war. But far away in Vienna, leaders are still scrambling to salvage the nuclear deal. They say that a deal now is closer than ever. But the war in Ukraine has overshadowed the talks. Russia now has new demands, ones that could end up derailing any nuclear deal. We tell you the story.
They say diplomacy is a hit or miss. You win some, you lose some. In West Asia, a much-needed win is in the works. The Iran nuclear deal. Nuclear talks in Vienna have officially paused, with no clear timetable for renewing them. Although a draft agreement is practically ready, Russia's new demands have dramatically complicated the situation. No one knows what the nuclear deal looks like, whether it's weaker or shorter. However, there are some indications. Number one, Iran will suspend uranium enrichment beyond 5%. Number two, Iran must release all Western prisoners. Number three, the West will unfreeze Iranian reserves worth $7 billion. And number four, the gradual lifting of sanctions.
The remaining differences are less than fingers of a hand. If no one adds a new issue, all those issues await a response by the United States.
These steps won't happen at once. They will happen in phases. Enrichment, prisoner release, and cash reserves come first. Once they are confirmed, sanctions will be lifted. But is Iran happy about this? Broadly speaking, yes. Their top priority is to secure relief from sanctions. But Russia is throwing up last-minute demands. The timing could not be more coincidental. A deal would bring significant volumes of Iranian crude back into the market. That could spell trouble for Russian President Vladimir Putin. Return of Iranian supplies would help offset market turmoil and help the West shun Russian crude for Iran's oil. So, Russia's demand is this. Its trade with Tehran should be exempt from Western sanctions.
We requested that our US colleagues give us written guarantees at the minimum level of Secretary of State that the current sanctions process launched by the US will not in any way harm our right to free, fully fledged trade and economic and military cooperation and military technical cooperation with Iran.
This 11th hour demand could derail the nuclear deal. Both the United States and Iran are eager to see Iranian crude flow into the energy market, and Moscow's demand has thrown a potential spanner in the works.
Peaceful nuclear cooperation between Iran, Russia and China and other countries obviously should not be limited or affected by any sanction. This is what we make of what was said.
The final stages are crucial. Both Iran and the US will have to offer concessions. Iran may have to unilaterally release all Western prisoners. The US may have to symbolically lift some sanctions. Neither move will be popular at home. But that's the cost of statesmanship. This nuclear deal could end the West Asian Cold War. But for that, both sides must swallow their ego. They must think about the long term. Right now, West Asia's future depends on two leaders, US President Joe Biden and Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. West Asia Bureau, WION World is One.
Don't go anywhere, we have a lot more lined up for you in this edition of the West Asia Post. We're gonna go to Yemen, the Arab world, oil prices and the refugee crisis. But first, let's take a look at what is making the headlines across West Asia.
Israel and Turkey are heralding a new era in relations. The countries agreed to rebuild their relationship after years of tensions, as Isaac Herzog became the first Israeli president to visit Turkey in 14 years. Israel's foreign minister Yair Lapid met Jordan's King Abdullah II in Amman. The two leaders discussed strengthening relations and the strategic importance of Jordan-Israel ties. Indian envoy to Palestine, Mukul Arya, was found dead inside the embassy in Ramallah. The 36-year-old diplomat is said to have died of natural causes. The Islamic State has confirmed the death of its leader, Abu Ibrahim al-Hashimi al-Qureshi. It also announced Abu al-Hassan al-Hashimi al-Qureshi as its new leader. The ISIS leader was killed in a U.S. raid in northwest Syria in February. Saudi Arabia holds its first World Defense Show in Riyadh, with the exhibition featuring almost 600 global companies representing over 40 countries. Archaeologists discovered a 9,000-year-old ritualistic complex in Jordan, near what is thought to be the earliest known large human-built structure worldwide. The Stone Age shrine site was excavated last year.
With the raging war, West Asia is back in focus, and this time the reason is oil. After sanctioning Russian oil and gas, Joe Biden's immediate priority is to stabilize oil prices. That is, making West Asian countries pump more oil. But there's one problem. He cannot get through to them. According to US media reports, leaders of Saudi Arabia and the UAE are not answering Biden's calls. We tell you more.
West Asia, a region that is a top priority for all US presidents. When Biden entered the White House last year, one of his main priorities was recalibrating United States' West Asia policy. But it looks like there are some relations that are beyond repair, like that with key ally Saudi Arabia. Under Donald Trump, Saudi Arabia had a long rope. The president overlooked its dismal human rights record. The murder of Khashoggi and the war in Yemen did not bother him. But under Biden, all of that changed. He did not call Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. He released declassified intelligence reports on the killing of Khashoggi and documents looking into Saudi's connection to the 9/11 attacks. Since then, the US-Saudi relationship has been on the rocks. In fact, when he was asked about high gas prices in February, Biden snubbed Saudi Arabia. He said, and I quote, "There's a lot of Middle Eastern folks who want to talk to me. I'm not sure I'm going to talk to them." The snub echoes a campaign promise Biden made. He wanted to turn Mohammed bin Salman into a global pariah. But a lot has changed since then. Inflation is at a 40-year high. Midterm elections are looming. And Russia has plunged the world into its biggest energy crisis in the last decade. So Biden seems to have changed his approach since then. Biden wants West Asian nations to pump more oil. Just one problem: he cannot get through to them. According to US media reports, the leaders of Saudi Arabia and the UAE are not answering Biden's calls. Reports say in the last few weeks, the White House tried to arrange two calls, one with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, the second with the UAE's Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan. Both men refused to take the call. But do you know what's even more humiliating? Both leaders spoke to Vladimir Putin. What does this snub reveal? A trust deficit. Both Saudi Arabia and the UAE are key US defense partners. They depend on American weapons. They depend on American leadership. And Biden has failed to give both. Reports even suggest that Biden is mulling a visit to Saudi Arabia. The White House calls this a premature speculation. But a trip to Riyadh could indicate the gravity of the crisis and how it is forcing Washington to reorder its priorities. However, the Crown Prince is not making it easy for Biden. Last week, MBS went out of his way to call out the White House in an interview. When asked about if President Biden misunderstands him, this is what the Crown Prince had to say. Simply, I do not care. We don't have the right to lecture you in America. The same goes the other way. The fact is, the rise in oil prices doesn't just benefit Russia. It also helps Saudi Arabia. Riyadh controls 55% of the world's crude oil supply. At the current rate, Riyadh is projected to earn over $375 billion from oil this year, a nearly 150% increase from last year. Biden needs to convince Saudi Arabia to boost oil production, but that will not be without caveats. In return, Riyadh could lobby for more defense deals and an active US involvement in the Yemen war. As for the UAE, they urged the US to put the Houthis on its list of terrorist groups and to send more military aid to help defend the country. But the US hasn't moved to address those Emirati concerns. Currently, Biden has an uphill task ahead of him. These are regimes he once sought to isolate or avoid. But with oil prices soaring, he is turning to them. The question remains, will they finally answer his call? West Asia Bureau, WION World is One.
Millions of Ukrainians have fled their war-ravaged country. This is Europe's worst refugee crisis since the World War II. Now, the European Union's quick hospitality has been applauded by many, but it is in stark contrast to its treatment of Syrian refugees in 2015. Over the last few years, Europe's migration policies have been toughened. They even built a wall to keep the refugees from entering the bloc, thus earning the name Fortress Europe. So what is different now? Is it really the so-called Europeanness of the refugees? In our next story, we decode the racist nature of Europe's response to the crisis. Crowded train stations. People walking for hundreds of kilometers. Freezing temperatures, long lines at the borders, and a journey like no other. Millions are fleeing Ukraine to escape the war. In the last few days, over 3 million have left Ukraine, taking refuge in the neighboring nations. It is Europe's biggest refugee crisis since the World War II, and the bloc has responded swiftly. New laws have been made for Ukrainian refugees. Border controls have been eased, and countries welcome them with open arms. But let's rewind back to 2015. Around 1.3 million people sought asylum in Europe. Most of them were from Syria, Afghanistan, and Nigeria. Do you remember how the West reacted? They shut their borders. They herded the refugees like cattle. And they branded them as terrorists. Europe's welcome to the Ukrainians has been lauded, as it should be. But why just Ukraine? Why not other countries? This because, according to EU leaders, Ukrainians are Europeans. Hence, they get the red carpet. We are not the only ones saying this. The Western media is full of such racist reportage.
It's very emotional for me because I see European people with blue eyes and blonde hair being killed.
These are not refugees from Syria. These are Christians, they're white, they're very similar.
This is not a developing third world nation. This is Europe.
These are prosperous middle-class people. These are not obviously refugees trying to get away from areas in the Middle East.
Like Iraq or Afghanistan, this is a relatively civilized, relatively European city where you wouldn't expect that or hope that it's going to happen.
It's not just the Western media that is biased. It is the West itself. When Europeans are affected, the war must be stopped. When people in West Asia or Africa are affected, it is a war for liberation, for freedom. Their lives are dispensable. Here's what the Bulgarian Prime Minister said about the refugees. Quote, "These people are intelligent, they are educated people. This is not the refugee wave we have been used to. People we were not sure about their identity. People with unclear pasts, who could have been even terrorists." So the anti-migrant rhetoric of Europe is selective. Their idea of war is biased. When they wage on, it is for liberation and democracy. When others do it, it is a crime. But the point here is, war is bad no matter what. A refugee is a refugee, irrespective of their skin color or where they came from. But what this war in Ukraine has shown us is this: some lives are more valuable than others. West Asia Bureau, WION World is One. The Kuwaiti government has cancelled a women's yoga retreat. This is the latest flashpoint in a long-running culture war over rights and freedoms of women. Women might be progressing across the Arab world, but in Kuwait, conservatives have recently cracked down more and more on women's rights.
It all started over yoga. Now it has become an assault on Islam. A recent yoga retreat in Kuwait was banned by authorities after conservatives thundered about Kuwait's degrading values. The yoga ruckus is just the latest flashpoint in the Sheikhdom. Kuwait is dealing with a culture war over women's behavior. Tribes and Islamists are wielding growing power in society as they push back against a growing feminist movement. For Kuwaitis, this is an unsettling trend. The country once prided itself on its progressivism when compared to its Gulf Arab neighbors. Now even Saudi Arabia is hosting its first open-air yoga festival.
Sitting on the ground is a kind of expression of opinion, whereas the idea of yoga is a symbolic idea which led to the intervention of MPs in people's freedoms.
Kuwait is a civil state governed by the constitution, which guarantees equality between men and women.
It comes at a time when not a single woman sits in Kuwait's parliament, and cases of so-called honor killings have gripped the public. In one such case, a Kuwaiti woman named Farah Akbar was dragged from her car last year. She was then stabbed to death by a man against whom she had lodged multiple police complaints. Farah Akbar's killing took the Gulf nation by shock.
We are here to protect the lives of women. We do not want a new victim. Any woman here today in this country is at risk of being subjected to murder, violence or rape. We do not want to hear about any new crime. We are tired.
Currently, there are no government women's shelters or services for abuse victims in Kuwait. Violence against women has only increased during the lockdown, but women continue to persevere. Last year, activists here launched a groundbreaking #MeToo movement, calling out harassment and violence against women. Hundreds of reports poured in. For the women, silence was not an option anymore. But activists have struggled to sustain the momentum. They themselves face rape and death threats every single day. Many have little faith in the government to change anything. But for them, that's not a reason to give up. West Asia Bureau, WION World is One.
Ukraine is a war that is currently underway. It's fresh on the minds of the world. But here's a war that the world has forgotten. The war in Yemen. It has killed thousands, leaving behind a conflict-ridden country where 80% of the population depends on aid. The UN calls it the world's worst humanitarian crisis. UNHCR Special Envoy Angelina Jolie visited the nation to raise awareness about the conditions there. Here's a report.
About 20 children each month. ايش تسأليها؟ She's asking you what's your name?
Angelina.
Angelina.
My reason to be here is to help others understand what the situation is like for you.
And part of my job is to make sure that the international community understands how serious the situation is. With that. Allah ma'ana. Allah yahfaz.
That's all we have for you on this episode of the West Asia Post. I will see you next week with a brand new lineup, bringing you more stories from West Asia. Until then, stay safe. I am Ghadi Francis, coming to you from Beirut, Lebanon, and you're watching WION World is One.